Welcome back to the Shared Practices podcast. This is episode 5 of the pre-ownership flashback. It's not really a season. It's kind of the end of season 3. And we're just going back and hitting some topics that are relevant to people who are still pre-owners. George is no longer in that camp. You have left me behind officially, George. I'm now the only pre-owner co-host of this show. So how does that feel?
You know, I hate to say it, but it feels pretty awesome.
I bet it does. So I think our episode, when this airs, it will have been 2 weeks since our little, but it's been over a month since we actually recorded that. So how's it been? You were a little frazzled at the time. Things gotten better?
Oh yeah. And it's funny because when we had recorded that episode, I think you caught me at, I think we caught Derek when he was a pre-owner or a brand new owner at like the perfect time because it was fresh and he was super overwhelmed. And I think you kind of caught me right as I was getting out of it, but you still got it.
Nice.
And no, I feel like things are going really, really well in terms of my confidence and
confidence is back.
Yeah. Especially on the business ownership side,
sure.
Confidence is definitely there. And, I feel like, what we've been wanting to do is being done. But clinically, I think it's a longer road and I'm taking it one step at a time. But in terms of the actual practice itself, things are going well.
So you closed like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago. How long has it been now?
Yeah, I think by the time this episode's released, it's like 2.5 weeks.
So we don't have time to go into a ton, but what's a specific change? Because I know originally you're like, yeah, I'm not going to change everything. I'm just going to sit back and kind of let things run. But it sounds like you couldn't help yourself. So what's a specific change that you've implemented that you were really glad you did within the first 2 weeks of being an owner?
So I'm going to take a step back. Okay. And so we recorded the episode in the beginning of July. I think it was like July 4th or something like that. And then about a week or so later, my seller ended up, while we were still associates, my seller canceled our Henry Schein account. And so the practice got a call from Henry Schein saying that the practice was sold to some, and then they were trying to pronounce our last name. And so
Cat's out of the bag.
Yeah. So everyone found out like 2 weeks. It was almost like 2 weeks and a couple days.
It was supposed to be like a secret. You were just like this associate that maybe was going to take it over in the future, but now everyone knows.
Exactly. And so everyone knew. And so we told them about 2 weeks before closing, kind of the whole plan. And then really from that point forward, the sellers finally let us just like start, being owners. And so it was kind of this 2 weeks of it was interesting, but then obviously we closed. And so I think we went into it with the mindset, initially kind of the approach that we talk about where, you take it easy, you take things slow, and you just let it happen. And it just wasn't working for me. I got to say, it just wasn't. And I'm surprised.
Twitching.
Oh, I am?
No, you were, as in like, you're like sitting there like, okay, we're just not going to change anything. We're going to sit here and I'm going to let things run how they are. And you're just like, twitch. No, I got to do something.
No, there were certain things were absolutely driving me bonkers. And it got to the point where, like, right after we told him, I went up to the front desk and I just, like, boom, just right there, like, literally 5 minutes after lunch, when we told everybody, just made a first thing that we did that we started changing. And so, but I think I'll put it this way. So having been in it and starting to do it, I think, we've been at it for about a month now in terms of being able to actually do things in the practice.
Okay.
I'll say, I think there are some changes that are easy to make, or there's changes that you're going to have very little resistance. And I think you can make as many of those, as your team can handle. But then there are other changes that are, more difficult and, more fundamental to what people, perceive, mess up people's work-life balance or whatever it may be. More so than those ones you're going to want to hold off on. So I think I'll say that. And so I feel like what we've been doing is trying to find those changes that are going to be impactful to the practice, but at the same time not disturb, our team's happiness or peace or whatever it is that they enjoy about the job.
Easy to implement.
Yeah. And, I think a lot of it has to do with talking to your team and asking them, what are the things that they feel like they could, they wish they could change that they haven't been able to. And so
Okay.
anytime they'll mention something, I almost always do it if it's something that, is in accordance with what we wanted to do in the first place.
Okay, cool. So I'm still going to pump you for one specific because, I just feel like more concrete examples are better. So what's one specific change you've made that you're happy about?
So I'll give you two.
Sweet.
So first, right after lunch, something's been driving me nuts was the practice they pre-authorized every single crown that was ever done. So when you're in a hygiene exam and you diagnose a crown, patient goes up to the front, and their way of committing to the crown is by asking the front desk to pre-authorize the, send the pre-authorization to their insurance. And all the pre-authorization is, they think that it means
it's like a rough estimate, right?
Yeah, it's a cost estimate. It's not even like we're going to cover this. It's just this is what your portion of the crown will be. And
probably.
Yeah. And so then they're like, okay, and in 2 to 4 weeks, I'll give you a call back and we'll schedule. And it was just such a momentum killer for any type of treatment getting done. And so what ended up happening is, you have all of these people who you've diagnosed something on, and they never end up back in your chair because they've had 2 to 4 weeks to forget about the issue. And then the front desk doesn't always call them back because it's this imperfect system. So that was one thing that was kind of driving me nuts, and I was unable to do anything. And so right after we finished lunch, I went up to the front desk and we were just chatting, and my front desk had mentioned that she did not like the pre-auth. Nice. And so I was like, okay, that's it. We're not pre-authing again. And, everyone's been very happy with that. Very easy change, less work for everybody, and more treatment in our schedule. So I think that was one thing that we did that I was very, very happy about.
Nice.
And second thing was, one thing we're going to talk about in the case acceptance season is the importance of hygiene, or the hygienists. Yeah. And so really from the day that I met them, I always kind of made them believe in how important they are for patients' treatment acceptance. And so, I think having them, it took a while for them to really see what I was talking about, but now I think we have this culture in our office where the hygienists diagnose, what they see, talk to the patient about treatment, and then when we come in, pretty much the exam is already done, the patient already knows what they need, and then we just confirm everything, and then they go up and schedule. And so now we kind of have this culture in office where everyone checks to see if the patient's scheduled, and so it's kind of this culture of case acceptance that I think we're really proud of, because I was telling you guys the other day that my hygienist, we had a patient, and she needed a crown like number 19 or something, and it was just an old crown that was just totally in terrible shape, really obviously needed to be replaced. And on
her, right? Like she personally needed a crown done.
No, on the patient.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So the patient did not schedule. And so the patient, my hygienist came back from lunch, and patient did not schedule. And so she storms up front, and she's like, why did she not schedule? And it was awesome because that is kind of like that culture, that caring, making the hygienist, take ownership of the fact that the patients, they're there in their chair and their dental needs are important, both restoratively and periodontally. And I think that mindset for the hygienist, and that has done wonders for our practice so far.
That's awesome. I love that example of just, she's mad because she's like, no, I thought we reached an understanding. Like, you need this crown, you should get it done. Okay, I'm going to get it done. And then she didn't get it done. The fact that your hygienist just owns that and is so invested, she's more upset than you are. Like, that's awesome.
No, and it's been so right now we're almost halfway through August, not quite halfway through August. And, because of the hygienist's involvement and everything, we've diagnosed more than we diagnosed the whole month of June. And we have had accepted 60-something% of everything we're diagnosing right now. And nice. So it's just, kind of double what you would have expected as a new owner, only because the hygienists are the ones that are really taking everything, and talking to the patients about it.
That's awesome. This is exciting. I am so excited to get these little tidbits of your practice transformation, and just as you gradually introduce things and make positive changes, and just we're going to get little feedback from your practice. So I'm excited. I'm excited to be back on the show. I'm excited that you're in practice. It's all good things.
Yeah. Let me just conclude with this.
Okay.
and I know this is totally Steve's episode and we're not doing his intro justice right now. But at the same time, I think the major thing that I think both my wife and I have really learned is the importance of getting buy-in from your team and how impactful things can be if you do it through and with your team. And so I think that's just kind of the main thing, is really just using the team and making sure that they're all on board with anything you ever do.
Well, we'll have to on future episodes talk about some specifics on how to do that, how to get that buy-in. So before we get too far, how about you introduce Steve? Because I don't really know him that well personally, but you're pretty good friends with him.
Yeah, so I think Dr. Derek Williams is somebody that is known very well on the show, and Steve is his best friend in dental school. So I met Steve at Breakaway when we went a few years ago, and he was with Derek, obviously. And I got to know Steve, and then as Derek bought a practice out of school, I also got an email from Steve, and he was looking at this practice that he bought in one of the Carolinas. He's going to get mad at me for not remembering. But he bought a practice out of school in one of the Carolinas, and he went over...
South Carolina.
Is it South Carolina? Okay. Yeah, that's right. And he just, the practice, I remember looking at it and thinking about how amazing its cash flow is. And it's like one of the top cash flowing practices I had seen at the time. But then at the same time, I kind of looked at it and I projected, a fair amount of growth based on, I forgot exactly what I was looking at, but I remember thinking that it would really grow. And it's been cool because I have a lot of follow up on him because he graduated more than 2 years ago now and bought the practice more than 2 years ago.
Right.
So we kind of periodically followed up and kind of watched him grow the practice as, I had projected. Obviously nothing to do with me, all him. And so I think this episode is really cool because it's a different type of practice that you don't typically hear about on our show. It's a very high volume, lower fee practice. And, he had a lot of turnover. And I think that's a lot of things that you don't necessarily hear about, but he is extremely successful. So really, really great episode, I think.
This blew my mind. And if any of you are having a little bit of pre-owner FOMO after this episode, if it's kind of like, oh man, I really, really want to find a practice like this. I did a Facebook Live about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, going into how to cope with the fallout of listening to our show when we have these guests on that are just crushing it, just destroying it. So if you have some of that after this episode, because I sure did, go back and watch that Facebook Live, and I can definitely empathize with you.
Yeah, no, he's doing incredibly well. It really blew my mind.
Okay, well let's get over to the interview. Here we are with Dr. Steve Van De Graaff.
I have with me here today a guest I've known for a long time, but hasn't really been on the podcast circuit, and so I'm really excited to have a new guest on today, Dr. Steve Van De Graaff. How's it going today, Steve?
Doing great, George. I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
So for those of you who don't know Steve is a really good friend of somebody who's been on the show a couple times now, Dr. Derek Williams, and they graduated together at Creighton. And I know Steve back from our days in dental school. I met him at Breakaway, I believe 3 years ago now. And Steve graduated and he bought a practice right out of school and he's crushed it. And so I thought he'd be a great person to have on. And I've kind of gravitated to the individuals who have bought out of school lately. I feel like I'm at a time in my life where they're very valuable, having been through a unique experience. So I thought I'd be a little selfish and have him on the show for me and for everyone else. So Steve, how's it going?
Very selfish of you, George. I'm doing great.
So for those of us who don't know you, tell us a little bit about your background and your dental school experience and whatnot.
Yeah. So I'm from Utah. I went to undergrad in Utah. I got married pretty young. My wife and I started our family pretty young, and when we had our first kid, I realized I needed to make some money. So that's when I decided to become a dentist. I went to dental school in Creighton, in Omaha, Nebraska, which I think a few listeners on the show, or I guess podcast interviewees, have been to Creighton, but I graduated in 2016. My time in dental school was probably similar to lots of people experience in dental school. It was somewhat stressful, but a lot of fun. Basically, Creighton was a great school for clinical experience. So I feel I was able to get a lot of hands-on training there. I certainly wasn't the brightest of any of the students, that's for sure. I think I just squeaked in to getting into dental school, but I somehow made it through, and I kind of just focused a lot of time and energy in clinical experience at Creighton. So was able to do a fair amount of clinical procedures, just the bread and butter stuff, and then was also able to do a fair amount of oral surgery that was really helpful in preparation for my private practice. So got my hands on a few implants and was able to do a bunch of third molar cases, probably about a couple dozen of them. I went on a few externships. I was on the oral surgery bandwagon for probably a year in dental school. My brother's an oral surgeon, so that's kind of the area that kind of I was gravitated towards. So just tried to soak up clinical time, and then also after I decided that I wasn't smart enough or I didn't want to try to become a surgeon or a specialist, I just kind of spent a lot of time, kind of like George and other people that you've been interviewing. I spent a lot of time in school trying to plan for practice ownership as soon as possible after school. And basically, that's kind of what I did. And I was fortunate enough to spend some time with some really bright minds that were really business oriented. You mentioned Breakaway. That was an eye-opening experience for me. In fact, I left a surgical externship up in Minnesota early to go down to that Breakaway conference, and that kind of opened my eyes up to the financial abilities of, I guess, general dentistry and the excitement of ownership. That's kind of where I got to meet you, George. Obviously, I lived next door to Derek Williams for 4 years, and so I think most of your listeners probably know Derek or have heard of him. So that was definitely a huge blessing for me to just get a little bit of the rub off of his energy and all his ideas. And then we kind of both jumped into ownership right out of school. So that was kind of my dental school experience. Probably not much more incredible than anyone else's. Probably pretty routine, but survived it, and it's a lot better outside of dental school. So if there's any listeners that are still in the trenches, you have a lot to look forward to, I guess I should say.
And Steve, when did you jump off the oral surgery bandwagon, as you mentioned?
Yeah. I was, I think it's the beginning of third year. I did 3 externships, and I thought it was cool, but I realized that wasn't for me. It was just a lot more schooling. It was a lot more involved, a lot more hours. And after spending time in a bunch of operating rooms, I realized I that wasn't my calling. I was more interested in just shucking teeth and having a good lifestyle and making an income and taking care of the family. It wasn't a calling to like put faces back together, and so I didn't want to go all 6 more years and go through all that. And so kind of early third year, I think the earlier you can make the decision not to specialize if you're in dental school, the better. So you can focus on business and less ticky-tacky grade games type stuff that is so much a part of school.
I'm really happy you said that. I think that's a piece of advice I generally give. Like my standard first line of advice to dental students is to decide on specializing early, because the skill sets and the things you focus on in dental school are so drastically different from your route as a GP versus your route as a specialist. So I'm really happy you said that. So Steve, when did you decide that you wanted to buy a practice out of school?
Probably in third year. I was just after I got the Breakaway manual, and I realized I saw what Scott Luna did. He did startups right out of school, and it was just really exciting. So I got to meet Todd Peterson. He was doing the same thing. There were a couple other people in Dental Town that kind of shared their experiences. So I figured I would just go ahead and try to play copycat and do what those people did. It's certainly not as bright as them, but I figure if someone else can do it, you can at least mimic them and fake it till you make it. So probably about third year.
So your initial plan was to do a startup then after graduating?
I initially I was going to try to associate for about 6 months while I was going to do my startup. So I did a lot of demographic research, and I was thinking for a long time I'd practice in West Texas. I got some demographic reports in El Paso. I spoke Spanish, so I thought maybe I could market down there. And then I don't know when it was, but eventually I started looking. Oh, Hunter Smith, huge, just a huge influence. With his practice valuations and his I guess his philosophy of practice acquisition rather than startups. That was kind of a big page turner for me in finding undervalued practices that are kind of a diamond in the rough, I guess you could say. And so I started just scouring practices through all the broker pages and every other state dental pages, and I sent out letters, did all the things that you recommend you do, and until I found my practice. And then I spent a lot of the last half of fourth year doing the legal and financial preparations to close on the practice that I have now.
So we're going to talk about your practice here in a second, but before we do, where was your radius? Like how far were you looking? What did you have a certain number of states or areas, or where exactly were you looking?
Yeah, my philosophy was I'd love to go back in the Mountain West and kind of live near family, but I wanted to be able to move absolutely anywhere that would provide a great financial or a great practice to get me in a position financially in a few years to live and kind of do whatever I want. So I didn't have any rules or radius. I just scoured. I mean, I looked all over the West. I looked a lot in Texas, and I looked all over the South.
So you kept it strictly to the United States then?
Yes, just
okay.
the United.
You're really constricting yourself then. There's some great opportunities south of the border, but you disciplined yourself, and you stayed north of the American-Mexican border. And so when in your time of dental school did you find that practice that you ended up buying?
It was, I think, probably November-ish of my senior year.
Okay. And then jumping to closing, when did you actually close?
So I engaged the buyer, and we started negotiations. I visited the practice in March. I was graduating in May. I visited in March. We came to an agreement in April, and then I went through all the legal and funding hoops, and then I was finally able to close on it when my license came, which was in late July. Late July. So there was I'm sure it's different for everyone, but I had to wait for like 2 months before I could get my license after I graduated. So there was this little waiting period, but end of July is when we officially closed.
Okay, and then where is that practice?
It's in North Augusta, South Carolina, which is just across the Savannah River of the Augusta, Georgia area, so southeast area of the United States.
Okay. And so for everyone who doesn't know your practice, tell us about it, in as much detail as you can remember.
Yeah, so I was able to speak with Scott Luna, and he recommended that I buy the highest grossing or highest producing practice that I could replicate. And so I arbitrarily, in my dental student mind, said I could probably do, between $500,000 to $800,000 of production. So that was kind of my production parameter, and I wanted to find the best or practice and least expensive. That's what I thought that was a really important criteria at the time. Practice within, I guess, those production ranges. I looked all over, made a few big trips to visit dental practices, and then this one came up, and it was super cheap, and it really caught my eye. It was like $250,000 for this practice that was producing, I think, 700 or so. And so I was interested in it. I went out and visited it, and I emailed my friend George Ipita Ferrari, and you gave me kind of your insights on the valuation of the practice. And basically, it was and is practiced in an extremely poor area, very, very old building, old equipment, and the selling doctor was a very belligerent, probably unethical doctor. So, I mean, it sounds like an awesome practice that everyone would probably wants to buy right now. But, anyways, I just kind of looked at it strictly numbers, and I mean, it was doing somewhat well, and I figured it's doing well with what I believed was a probably underproducing doctor because of his rapport with patients, and then there were not a lot of dentists within 5 miles. So I went into it understanding that it's lower income. I mean, it was like 33% Medicaid, lots of emergency dentistry, definitely not, a lot of high-end cosmetic cases. But at the time when I was a dental student, that kind of appealed to me because, other stuff was kind of intimidating. And I in dental school, I worked on, these nasty mouths, and I pulled a ton of teeth. And so that's kind of what I was familiar with at the time. And so I figured that might be a good fit. At the time, I thought I was really into acquiring multiple practices. So I thought this would kind of be a quick, cheap way in to get in and get some good cash flow going before I expand to other locations. I bought the practice, and it's kind of been what I kind of thought it would be. It's a little bit lower income, lots of Medicaid, tons of oral surgery, but so far it's been going really well.
So a lot to unpack there. Let me start with. So let me go back, and first thing I can remember to ask you is you kept on saying was. So you said back when I was a dental student, I thought blank. You kind of speaking past tense. Can you kind of elaborate on your thoughts now on the procedure mix and the population and the type of dentistry that you're doing? Do you still agree with yourself, the decision that you made a couple years ago?
In many ways, yes. I think it's been very good. I've been able to hit a lot of financial goals very quickly out of the gate. I guess I underestimated the workload it is to be very profitable in a low income or low fee practice. At the time when I was a dental student, I got to see 3 patients a day, and so man, I saw a schedule of 30 patients a day. I was like, wow, that's awesome. I'm going to be busy. I'm going to crush it. And now I see usually between 35 and 40 patients a day. And it's a little bit tiring, a little bit stressful at times. So at the time, I guess I didn't understand or fully appreciate the fee for service. Like if I could go back, I think fee for service model would be another consideration to look at. I mean, I've done really well with this model, but I wasn't really, as a dental student, open to or I didn't have my eyes open to, I guess, fee for service, lower volume, higher procedure mix dentistry. And I've made this work really well, but it takes a lot of effort, if that makes sense.
Yeah, you work really hard, every day you're at work, and I get that. Next thing I wanted to unpack is, so you found this practice in November, you went to go visit it in March, and you closed end of July. So from the time you found it to the time you bought it was almost a year. So most listeners who have listened to this podcast, practices usually don't stay on the market that long. So what about this one do you feel like made it? I mean, clearly from the purchase price you got, the amount of collections it was doing, and one thing I know from looking at it is the overhead was like incredibly low. I remember looking at it like, is it really cash flowing this much? So what was the overhead? Do you remember, like on the initial valuation?
Yeah, I think it was like 40, low 40s. Yeah. And it had been on the market a long time. That's why it was like a big red flag. I was like, why? Like, this is kind of sketchy. It's like in a poor income area. But I think it was just really the doctor. Like he was a jerk. He just had tons of staff turnover. And I think he scared away sellers. So I thought, hey, if he's doing well and he's not a great guy, what would a great communicator and a person that cared about patients, like what could that dentist do? And so, yeah, it worked out.
So you think it's the seller's abrasive personality is what left it on the market?
Yeah, that and and it was just super old. I mean, I went in there. There's like shaggy carpet. There's like wallpaper peeling. I mean, it's next to like a liquor store. The house across the street is, I think they grow drugs there. It's just in a poor area of town, And so I think when people look at a practice, that's not like what they're envisioning, what they want for the rest of their life. But I kind of looked at it with more of a, I guess, entrepreneurial, like, what are the numbers? Like, what's the demographics? How can I change this practice and get in super cheap? And it's worked out pretty well.
So I wanted to ask you, before we talk about how it's going now, I wanted to ask you, in terms of the broker, was it on market?
Yeah, it was.
Okay. And so as a fourth-year dental student, then you didn't have an issue with the broker at all?
I wasn't a big fan of him. I think he just listed it. The broker, he never even visited the practice. I think he was just someone that the doctor, even, it was like ADS. So to be honest, he wasn't super helpful. Just kind of gave me the info that I asked for, and I kind of evaluated on my own.
Okay, before we move on, a quick word from our sponsor, Q Optics. In the last episode, I mentioned that I had upgraded my loops from 3.5 to 4.5 while I was still in dental school. And when I did that, my neck started hurting. And I was so frustrated because I loved that 4.5 magnification. First I thought, oh, it's the angle of declination, or maybe it's the weight because it's a bulkier frame and heavier loops, and maybe that's what it is. I realized that the reason my neck hurt all the time was how much I had to bend down to look over my loops. And so if you look at yourself in the mirror, this is what I want you to do. I want you to stand in front of the mirror with your loops on and look at your eyes looking straight forward. If the loops, if the telescopes are blocking your eyeballs, that means anytime you look at something that's not through the loops, you have to crane your head down to look at it. You are hurting your neck. It blows my mind. Why can't you make a frame that's taller, that reaches down further? And if you look at the cover of the podcast, you can see that Q Optics has designed their own frame that dips down to make room for the optics to go below your eye level. So I can put on my loops and I can actually look in the mirror and see clearly my eyeballs completely over the level of the telescopes. If you find that your neck's hurting or that your back is starting to hunch, maybe it's not necessarily the angle of declination or the weight. Maybe it's the fact that there isn't enough room in the lenses to see over your loops. So if you're ready to make the upgrade to better ergonomics, you can email sales@qoptics.com. That's q-optics.com with the promo code SP16 for $100 off your next pair of loops or $300 off your next loops and light combo. Q Optics. It's time to have a better look.
So now you walk into the practice. So, Derek has an episode on our podcast where he talks about his first month of practice ownership and how miserable, he thought that whole experience was. I'm currently in my first month of practice, and right before we got on, I talked about how unpleasant it can be at times. And so it's your turn. Your first month or two of practice all by yourself in a practice that you bought, high volume, lots of patients, low fees. How did it go?
Yeah, I mean, very well that sick feeling. So the dentist, I actually didn't get to really meet this. The staff I met in April was a completely different staff I met when I moved out there, and he was like a paranoid individual, and he didn't want me to come and meet the staff until we closed because he was sure that they would leave if they saw another dentist. So I actually didn't even meet the staff until the morning we closed. I walked in the back and he introduced me and said, "This is the new dentist," and that was it. And so I shook all their hands and I said, "All right, let's look at the schedule. This is what we're going to do," and we just survived. I mean, they were.
Can I ask you? So meeting the staff for me was like really nerve-wracking. Was it?
Yeah.
How was it for you?
Yeah, same. Like I'm total introvert person. I don't like to boss people around. I just like to be chill and be nice and so it's totally out of my comfort zone. I've never like bossed people around, or I'm not that that's what you do. I've never managed people. I've never been a great leader. And then a bunch of strangers right here, and we have a waiting room full of screaming kids, and I haven't done dentistry for like 3 months, and when I did, it was on one patient. So super stressful time, and but I don't know, I just somehow survived it, and ended up, every one of those staff members that he had hired, I've let go. I think one quit, and I have a completely different staff now than I did then. But yeah, it's definitely a stressful time. So I would just hang in there, George. Make sure you get like take a vitamin each day, so you don't like become like sick or something. It'll get better.
That's funny. So let's talk about the staff turnover for a second. It seems like in a lot of ways you had unorthodox transition that could have been challenging. How long did it take for, how fast did the staff kind of fall off?
Yeah, they, to their credit, they were nice. Like, oh, I think most staff, and I think most patients are. They see a new dentist and they're like, oh, he's the new guy. That's great. They're kind of excited for a new stage, and they understand it's kind of a big endeavor. And so I think most of them are really supportive. For me, it was about 6 months, and 6 months in until we kind of got in our groove, and I was starting to act like, starting to produce a little bit more, and there was a person that just had terrible attitude, just like terrible. And I was so scared to fire people, those first 6 months. So I let her go, and then the hygienist was her friend, and so the hygienist quit, and then the other assistant quit, and the wheels fell off pretty hardcore 6 months in, and then I kind of scrambled to get some more staff in, and kind of had staffing struggles for like a whole year, and now we're kind of in a groove, and I got great assistants, I got new front desk. A year in, my front desk, the one that did stick with me for a year, I caught her embezzling for me, so I fired her, and I think that was the best thing for my practice, to be honest, was just firing her and getting her out of there. You hear the expression, fire fast. I should have done it like the first month I got there, but I was just so scared, to fire staff and anger patients, but it wasn't a big deal at all. I think it's important to, if you have good staff, keep them, build relationships with them. If they have relationships with patients, that's good. My practice didn't have a ton of goodwill with just kind of the nature of my practice, so it wasn't as vital to keep the staff. In fact, they were much longer than I was, so it wasn't a huge deal.
Yeah, I wanted to, kind of make that point for our audience. I think everyone listening, it kind of goes against everything we've ever said, in terms of a complete staff turnover in the first year or so. But at the same time, I think each practice model has its different requirements, and the amount of goodwill that your staff had, because they were all short tenured anyway, was probably not very much. So, I just don't think for you it was going to really cause a lot of attrition.
Right.
So I don't think, and I think you just said that, but I wanted to ask, I asked you before we got on, if there's anything off limits. I kind of ask everybody that. You said no, so I'm going to ask about the embezzlement. I mean, I don't know how much you want to share, but are you willing to share anything about that?
Oh yeah. It wasn't like a huge thing. Basically, my insurance coordinator off, front desk, she was just, I'm embarrassed to say I let her work in my office, but she was just terrible. She was late. She would just have the, pouty face all the time. But I thought that she, I had this big accounts receivable when I come on, so I thought she had like all these little payment plans and she could work it out, and so I was afraid to let her go. But no, she was doing a terrible job, but I was afraid to fire her so I do my own QuickBooks. Every couple of months I just go down real quick and just approve everything and look at any checks, and I found, whoa, there's a weird check for $2,000, and what's this? And I looked it up, and there it was written out to her, and my name was signed on the bottom of it, and I was like, I don't really think I signed this check. And so I just showed it to her. She started crying. I just let her go, just cut the cord right away. It was really hard because I didn't know anything about insurance, or no one in the office knew about how to file insurance or how to do any of that. But if anyone has to do it, just do it quick. Just let them, say, I actually called an embezzling expert and they kind of talked about it, but basically just say, you don't accuse them, don't ask them about it, don't say this, just say funds that you had responsibility over are missing, and I'm going to have to let you go. So I let her go. I ended up not. I called the police about it, and I just kind of got a feel for my options, and I ended up not pressing charges. I think, she's like a single mom, and I think she's probably lost her kids, and it's a really sad story. So I didn't arrest her or anything. I just kind of let her go and cut the cord and moved on. And now things are great. I mean, since he left, our numbers we're just doing so much better. I'm just, it's so funny I didn't do it earlier. I'm sure everyone that has someone like in the office learns that lesson. But yeah, I do it early, and embezzlement is real. I mean, I'm kind of glad I'm glad I did my my little financial review every couple of months and found that, because I don't think anyone else would have if I didn't see that myself.
Yeah, I think that's obviously not a great story, but I appreciate you sharing that. And Steve, now I think the good part that I really want to talk about is let's chart the growth. So where was the practice when you bought it? Where is it now, and how did you get there? What kind of increments did you grow in?
Yeah, like number wise,
Yeah, as much as you want to share.
Oh no, it's fine. So, the year before I got it, it was I think he was producing like almost up to 700. The other dentist, it was declining revenue. So I think he was on track to do like 475 or 500 the year that I took over. So I took it over in 2016. I don't really remember what we did for the first few months, but 2017 we did just over a little north of $1 million, and I kind of improved on the low overhead. I mean, I bought the practice very inexpensively and did a few things to lower the overhead even more. And so I think my last year the overhead was probably about 35%. So I got a good take home. I was able to pay off all my student loans, which is great. And then this year we're on track to do, I think, 1.4
Wow.
in collections, and then our overhead's just about 31-ish%. So
Oh my goodness.
yeah, it's going really good. It's kind of funny. Like I don't think any other dentist in the city, if they knew that would be coming from this office, but it's kind of been a little diamond in the rough, I guess you could say.
Yeah, that's awesome, Steve. I had no idea it was going that well for you. So first of all, what in a reasonable amount of time, what would you attribute the majority of the growth and increase to?
That's a great question. These sound like cliche answers, but like we went in there and our culture is that we are going to treat our patients great and we're going to get them in. Like we have the mindset that we're going to have a lot of people every day and we're going to treat them all. I have 3 columns for me and my assistants, and then we have assisted hygiene that has supposed to have 2 columns full at all times. So we see a ton of patients, and we haven't done a ton of marketing. I mean, I guess with our low insurances, we don't have to do a ton, but we've got a great reception from internal referrals. Lots of people. You get their painful tooth out on Uncle Bubba, and he tells all his nephews, and they all drink Mountain Dew too, and so they come over, and a lot of internal referrals. I think Google reviews is just absolute king. I mean, it's free, but it's I believe the best type of marketing. And I think for your listeners, if they're looking to buy a practice, I think your first sit down with a patient when you kind of explain to them, hey, I'm building this up. I'm trying to kind of get my name out there. I'm so grateful for that you're still a patient here. Would you be willing to write a review for us on the internet? And I think you can get 50 quick reviews. I mean, it's awesome. You'll just get a ton of new patients, at least where I'm at. So we've done, I guess, internal marketing, just kind of built the practice back up. I think it was just really underproducing, and not a lot of people even knew the practice was, down that alley street there. So, and then, we've got a really vibrant staff now. We reach out to old patients, we call them, we have them come back in, and we're averaging, I think, probably about 75 to 100 new patients a month.
Wow. So
Yeah.
You talked about one thing I want to touch on, and then I'll go back to something else. But you talked about your philosophy and your culture as a team of getting people in, and I think one thing that Scott Luna talks about is the mental flexibility as a dentist and as a team to take on extra procedures or same day stuff. And I'd imagine that in your type of demographic, it's a lot of same day treatment. Is that correct?
That's very accurate. Yeah. And I think I love how Scott says that, taking on the extra root canal at the end of the day or whatever. And that's definitely a mindset we have. We don't have like a ton of systems. Like, if Breakaway came into my office, they'd be like, "Oh, your check sheets, where's this system?" So I'm not the best system guy, but we definitely kind of have a culture that we're going to get people in here. We're going to be busy. We're going to take care of them. We accept walk-ins if you want to come in and get your teeth cleaned and start that same day. Like, all our staff is on board for that. They understand. Sometimes we'll work through lunch and we'll take turns eating. I mean, I work through lunch. They'll take turns, eating lunch. One of them stays, a little later if we have someone come in at the end of the day. Everyone has their own day, and it's just kind of a mantra that we have, and that's an important part of our practice.
So, again, from an outsider looking in, I think that's one of the biggest, that culture and that, that you've created is probably one of the biggest reasons why, if I had to guess. Just so briefly describe your staff. So list all your staff members, how many hygienists, dental assistants, whatever, and then kind of talk about how you've instilled that culture and what you've done to create that culture.
Yeah. So my staff, I have 2 front desks. One of them is bilingual, so we just treat some Hispanic patients, not a ton, but we're able to do that. I've kind of taken a little bit different approach than lots of people do, and probably lots of recommendations do. I had an established dental assistant when I came in, and she had worked at every specialty office. She was a great assistant, but I just felt I kind of felt like sometimes if staff works at other offices, they bring that mentality, whatever that dental office was, they expect that to be yours. So if they work at a specialist office that sees 3 patients a day, they might not be up for the pace of my practice. And so I actually just reached out or put some ads out there and said, no dental experience needed. I will train you. And I just offered, $1 or $2 above minimum wage. And a lot of people applied, and I kind of group interviewed them and found a couple people that had great personalities and offered to train them to become dental assistants. They didn't know anything, so it was definitely kind of hard to train them, but they had the right attitude, and I pay them much, much less than probably most dentists have to pay their staff. I mean, I love them, but I would rather have a low staff overhead if it's my preference. And so 2 assistants and 1 front desk, all 3 of them, I just hired them just that way. Like, one of them, I found a really smiley person at Chick-fil-A and said, "Would you like to come be a dental assistant?" And they said, "Oh, wow, that's incredible, work at the dental office." And they're really grateful for it. And then I found a hygienist that was working in another Medicaid office that understood the importance of, flexibility with no-shows or double booking. And now, so there's six staff, and they're kind of all on the same page about treating patients great and working hard and kind of moving from operatory to operatory.
So you have 2 front desk, 2 dental assistants, and 1 hygienist. So I'm missing one, right?
Yeah, sorry, 3 dental assistants.
So 3
to be
assistants.
Honest, I think we are maybe even a little bit overstaffed. But I've just found just having half an assistant extra is just really helpful because their dog dies or someone gets sick. It's really stressful on staff when you're understaffed, and so that was a kind of a lesson I had to learn. So we have 3 assistants and 2 front desk. So a front desk can be sick, an assistant can be sick, and we're still rolling.
And I think again, given your model, the ability to have mental flexibility, I think you have to be a little overstaffed, to be honest. I don't
Yeah.
think it would work very well if you were trying to really keep staff to a minimum, because then you would not have that eagerness and the ability to accommodate, an overflow.
Yeah, great point. Yeah, that's very true, very true.
So I know this because we talk, but you've started working with Justin Short,
Yeah.
and so I want you to talk a little bit about your experience, because I think everybody, they think Justin Short is like a practice model, and you have a practice model that is very dissimilar to the one that people maybe associate him with. So can you talk a little
Yeah.
bit about your experience with TLP, the lifestyle practice, and what working with him has really added to your game?
Yeah. First of all, I'd probably like most of your listeners, I'd totally recommend TLP. I mean, Derek, obviously, he was like my best bud, and I've just kind of piggybacked on his ideas for the last 3 years. So, obviously, he's been a huge influence on me. And then Justin, I hired Justin as a coach. About 8 months ago, I had actually had the practice rolling pretty well before I hired him. I paid off all my student loans, and then I asked him, and I said, I have kind of a low fee but high volume setup. It's kind of different than what I understand your practice to be. Do you think it'd be a fit? And he said, for sure. I mean, the principles apply. And so I hired him, and he was completely right. He really helped me. He's just great. He's just awesome. I guess the biggest things he helped me with was leadership. He taught me how to like communicate to staff to help them really buy into my vision. And he used phrases, say it this way. Don't be afraid to bring this idea up. Don't, give them more appreciation, and just really helped me with my communication with my staff. Because like I'm not really the most natural leader, so that was huge for me. Probably the biggest thing. And then I think he has the same mindset. Maybe not lower fee, but he's all about presenting this crown, presenting this extra tooth. Doing this Invisalign. We're getting it going today. I mean, and the gas pedal's always on, and so that definitely applies for me in my setup too. And then, I mean, this is kind of outside dentistry, but he's just been great guidance for investments for me too, because my practice is it's producing wealth moderately well, and he just talked to me about how to place that in the right places, and he's just going above and beyond trying to help me kind of get the passive income stream started. So he's been like a big influence and a big help for me for sure. I know you're probably experiencing that right now yourself, George.
Yeah. I don't have enough good things to say about my experience with Derek and Justin, and can totally relate to all the things that, it's funny today, we were on a call, and I kind of told him, I was like, that thing, the thing we're talking about is kind of awkward for me to do. It doesn't seem like I should be doing that as a dentist. And he's like, well, what you want is unrealistic and like crazy results, and you have to do things that are not regular dentist things to do. And I think that mentality that he has of really pushing you to go outside your comfort zone and do what you need to do applies to everybody and everything. And so,
Yeah.
he's funny when he talks about it, though. I don't know, it kind of makes you laugh.
Yeah, they're both great. Yeah, yeah, Derek and Justin, they've both been just huge for me. So yeah, I would have people look them up for sure.
I wanted to take a minute to talk about the sponsor for today's episode, Lendeavor. Lendeavor is the modern lender to dental practices. With innovative software, exceptional service, and decades of combined experience in dental practice lending, Lendeavor is reshaping the experience of getting a practice loan. Practice owners are some of our economy's most highly trained and hardest working entrepreneurs. Yet, financing a practice takes too long and costs too much. Lendeavor is a team of credit experts, software engineers, computer scientists, financiers, lawyers, and academics that have come together to deliver market-leading rates, speed, and convenience. They've built software that takes complicated transactions, like buying your first practice, and makes them simple. As a result, you spend less time applying for your loan, and they spend less time processing it. This efficiency means faster funding and lower rates for you. Whether you're acquiring your first practice, remodeling, or expanding your existing practice, buying commercial real estate, or even updating equipment, take the first step today by pre-qualifying online in minutes. I'll leave a link in the show notes. Lendeavor's online pre-qualification is safe, secure, and seamless, and pre-qualifying with Lendeavor will never affect your credit score. Click the link in the show notes or send an email to info@lendeavor.com to learn more. Financing made or arranged pursuant to California Financing Law, license number 60DBO53100. So in terms of, your future goals and where you want to take your practice to now, what's kind of your mindset moving forward?
So my goals have been to, I kind of want to keep doing what I've been doing, financially wise, but do it with working less. So this year we've dropped Fridays, so I work four days a week. That's been nice. I think I've taken 3 or 4 weeks off so far this year. We'll do a couple more. So I kind of want to just kind of keep this going, but do it working less. And so far that we've been able to do that. I mean, that's a whole nother subject, but even like a practice like mine where like it's very dentist centric, where you have to be there drilling and pulling teeth all the time to really get production, you can do it in less time. I mean, I've dropped Fridays, and I mean things have just increased. I wonder if we've taken time off and things have increased. So just kind of want to. My goals are to balance the lifestyle side of it, and then just start investing in passive income vehicles. So hopefully we can walk away if that's what we decide to in a few years.
So just wanted to ask you. You mentioned at the beginning of the interview your brother's an oral surgeon. I mean, do you guys compare income? I'm just curious.
We don't. The guy's a saint. And he's incredible. I got this distal angular third molar, and I took the crown off, and the patient starts like gushing blood all over, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's one of those moments. And so I, here, assistant, stick your finger down here and squeeze really hard. I'm gonna go call my brother. Like he's been super helpful for that. But I tried to kind of talk about finances, and he's don't worry about the money, just take care of the patients, which I totally admire, and I definitely aspire to provide his level of care. But we don't talk a lot about finances just for that reason.
No, that's fine. Totally acceptable answer. I just, I think if I had to guess, I think that you guys have the inverse of the regular GP to oral surgery income ratio. But
I don't know. I think he's doing great too. Yeah.
Either way,
Yeah.
Anyway, so I think that, from your experiences, what would you now tell yourself as a third, fourth year dental student? You've committed to practice ownership. You're feeling very confident in your decision. Would you still buy out of school? Would you buy the way that you did? What would you have done differently, perhaps?
If I had to do it again, I would probably associate for like 6 months to a year, just because you don't know what you don't know, and I think you'll just be able to make a more informed decision on your practice. I mean, mine worked out great, but it was really tough. It was really, really tough for a while, and I think a lot of the headaches of just being a new dentist and learning to speak with patients and present treatment. If you kind of can have that under your belt, then managing a dental practice will be a little easier, even if it's just like 6 months to a year. And then I would also say, just kind of chill, take a deep breath. Like if you're a dental student and you kind of look back at undergrad when you were like trying to get into dental school and you were like so stressed about, my DAT score or my grades or this or that, or do I have enough shadowing service out? I don't know. You were totally worried about, will the next step come? And now you look back at it, it's like, oh wow, I should have just not worried so much. Well, it's kind of the same thing. Things are going to work out. Just live in the now. I mean, work hard, prepare for the future, but things will work out. So just kind of go about it with a happy attitude, I guess. That sounds like it comes out of a fortune cookie or something, but that's kind
go
of true.
About it with a happy attitude. Well, should we even title the episode that? Go about it with a happy attitude. All right, Steve. Thank you so much for coming on. I hope you guys got a lot out of the interview. So, Steve, if you want to, are you okay with me leaving your contact in the show notes of the episode today?
Yeah, for sure. That'd be fun. I love to connect with people. Thanks, George.
No problem. So thanks for coming on, Steve. I'll leave his email in the show notes, and then anybody wants to reach out to Steve, feel free.
Cool, man. All right, George. Sure appreciate it.
Phenomenal. Steve blew my mind in so many ways. So for you, what were some things that stood out?
Well, I think, one thing that really stood out to me was his mental flexibility. I think that is required for that type of practice. And also, I think the one thing that I want everyone to take home is not everything we say in the show applies to every model. So, on the show, we talk about the importance of keeping your staff and, not rocking the boat or, doing things in a certain way. And I think, the amount of turnover he had is really astonishing. And it, if you look at how much money he's making or how much money he's made, it wouldn't really matter based on how much turnover he's had. So I think that goes to show that his model is less about certain things and more about his ability to be convenient and fast and efficient. And so, some things that we talk about, I think sometimes you need to put your, application skills forward and understand that it doesn't always apply to every model in every situation. I think Steve's a great example of that.
Absolutely. And the other thing I loved from this was he's another parallel to Derek in that both of them did the opposite of you. You said, I think I can find a phenomenal practice for me in this tight geographic area. And they both said, I am willing to go anywhere to find a practice that can allow me to just like crush it and financially achieve what I need to achieve and get where I want to get very quickly. And so, Steve's like, yeah, I kind of wanted to be out in the West in the mountains with my family. So I ended up in South Carolina, like that was how far he was willing to travel. And when Howard Ferrand would come speak at our dental school or, on his podcast, one of the things he talks about is like, don't do the military, go just do a practice in somewhere that you wouldn't necessarily choose as your first place and count that as your time in the military. So, Steve could do 4 years at this practice, sell it, and then go move wherever the heck he wanted to. And he'd be way ahead financially of anyone who did the military. He paid down all his student loans in 1 year, and then he could have cash set aside and then a beautiful practice to sell off if he wanted to, or he can stay there if he loves it. So I just love that they knew that their financial goals were enough of a priority and they had flexibility with, family and other priorities that they said, okay, we can fly and visit family. We can do things here locally to keep ourselves entertained, stuff like that. So it's just a great example of broadening your reach and your search to find that diamond in the rough.
Yeah, I found it funny when he was talking about, well, if I have to get on a plane to see my family anyway, I might as well make the flight like an extra hour. You know what I mean? Like, it's just like, okay, just move to the other coast, why don't you?
Yeah, exactly. No, I thought that was hilarious.
No, but I think that's a great point. And, I think when we have these super successful people on the show, it can sometimes paint an unrealistic picture of what your expectations should be as a new grad or a new owner. And, I just want to caution people that I think he's like the really big exception. I'll put it that way.
Oh, absolutely. And that's, I'll reference back to the FOMO. If you guys are feeling like you're not getting into ownership soon enough because you're, whatever reason, in an associateship, residency, or dental school, or whatever it is, go back and watch that Facebook Live, or just come vent on our Facebook page. Just be like, I loved that episode, but it also kills me. So anything else from that you really took away?
No, I mean, I think just the contrasting model and applying a lot of the principles that we learned about both on our season 2 about acquisitions and also our Justin Short miniseries, and watching him apply those to a model that you would not expect to see them and have him be super successful. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned in that whole situation.
Well, and that type of high volume Medicaid practice gets a bad rap. Like people tend to say things or think things about practices like that and assume that it can't be a successful, happy place to work and that you can't make that good of money. And he's kind of proven all that wrong. He's one of their philosophies and their cultures is putting the patient first and having a great experience there. So, they're obviously not giving people mani-pedis and like a spa experience, but they are still taking care of their patients and making that a priority in their culture, which I thought was really cool.
Did you miss the part about the mani-pedis during the extractions?
Oh, man. That, you know what? That could totally, you could just do red. So then if there's any splatter, it just blends in. Oh,
my gosh. Okay. That's hilarious.
So that, I think we'll wrap up on that. Awesome episode. Thanks for getting Steve on. I also wanted to say thank you to our audience. We just hit 200 5-star reviews on iTunes. So thank you guys so much. I think the feedback that we get from you guys when people reach out in email or they leave a review, and just like my favorite is just people who've actually bought practices that started listening to our podcast when they hadn't bought a practice, and that this was part of their motivation or part of their pathway to get there. Like that just blows my mind. It gets me so excited to do more and to help in any way we can. So, and also the responsibility now, I feel this weight that like, okay, now we got to help people be successful in their practices because we've promised them that practice ownership is worth it. Now let's deliver on that.
Yeah, no, I'm excited for the next chapter and where things are going with the show. That being said, I also wanted to mention how hilarious it was last week in the outro where you referenced... Oh my gosh, that was so funny.
His username is Harsh Wiener. I mean, like, who puts that as their iTunes name and then just goes reviewing things with that name? Like, and just owns up to it. Like, the review is completely serious and sincere and just like, okay, I'll take it.
I mean, you totally just mentioned it on the show. Like, you didn't even hold back.
Yeah, George, this is real radio. This is podcasting. This is where dentistry is going.
Oh my gosh. Well, once again, shout out to Harsh Wiener for the great review.
Absolutely. Well, cool. Hey, George, you want to wrap us up?
Yeah. Well, we'll see you guys next week on the Shared Practices podcast.